The light from two suns fell across a wide marble hall that stretched farther than Mira could see. The floor gleamed like silver glass. Strange blue flames flickered in tall bowls made of crystal. Lines of alien guards stood silent on both sides, their tall forms covered in smooth white armor that caught the light and reflected it in shifting colors. Mira walked slowly between them. Her feet were bare. The air felt cool and dry against her skin. She had been taken from a small research station near a red moon. One moment she was sleeping, and the next she woke to voices that did not belong to humans. They spoke in strange tones, but somehow she understood them through a thin device placed near her ear. They called her a gift, and told her she was being sent to a noble of high status. The words made little sense to her, but she could tell from their faces that this was something important to them. Now she stood before a throne made of dark stone. The figure sitting upon it was unlike anything she had ever seen. The alien was tall and graceful, with skin that shimmered faintly like liquid metal. His eyes were pale gold and his expression calm. He wore no crown, yet everyone bowed when he raised a hand. Mira guessed that he was the one they called Tavrin. The court around him watched as two attendants led Mira to the front. She felt small in that vast room, smaller still under the hundreds of eyes that followed her. She tried to stay steady, reminding herself that panic would not help. She had learned long ago to watch, to listen, and to wait before acting. It was the only reason she had survived deep space life as a researcher among many worlds. When she stopped before Tavrin, an elder stepped forward to speak. His voice carried across the hall like a soft bell. "My Lord Tavrin, the Council of Trade from the outer sector presents to you this rare being, a creature from the world called Earth. She is given as a mark of respect and alliance." Tavrin tilted his head slightly. His eyes studied Mira with quiet interest, not cruelty but something she could not name. He spoke, and though the words were foreign, the small translator hummed near her ear, turning them into gentle, clear speech. "She is alive and aware. You call her a gift?" "Yes, my lord," the elder replied. "Her kind is known to be clever and expressive. The traders thought she would bring joy to your household." Mira kept her gaze low but listened carefully. The alien's voice had a depth that made her heart beat faster, not from fear but from the feeling that he was far more thoughtful than the others in the room. After a long silence, Tavrin rose from his seat and walked down the steps. His long robe flowed behind him like liquid silver. He stopped a few steps away from Mira. "You are called Mira?" he asked. "Yes," she answered, her voice steady but soft. He looked at her again, his golden eyes curious. "You are from Earth. Your people make tools and ships, but you are not bound by us. Why would they send one of your kind as a gift?" "I was not sent," she said quietly. "I was taken." A faint stir ran through the hall. The elder glanced at Tavrin, unsure if he should speak, but Tavrin raised a hand and silence fell again. "I see," he said at last. His tone carried no anger, only thought. "Then your presence here is not by your will." Mira shook her head. "No," he turned to the elder. "Take note. The one you call a gift was not given. She was stolen." The elder bowed quickly, his face uneasy. "Forgive us, my lord, the traders told us otherwise." Tavrin looked at Mira again. "You may rest here until I decide what is to be done. You will not be harmed." Mira did not know if she could trust his words, but the calm in his eyes gave her a small sense of comfort. The guards led her through long halls filled with glowing panels and soft music. Every doorway opened at their approach. They brought her to a chamber with high windows that showed the two suns setting over a green sea. The room had no locks, no chains. A soft bed made of fine threads waited for her. Food that looked strange but smelled pleasant sat on a low table. She sat quietly, thinking. The alien noble had spoken with care, not like someone who saw her as an object. Yet she was still a stranger here. She could not guess what would happen next. Later that night she heard the sound of the door sliding open. Tavrin entered alone. He carried a small device that cast a gentle blue light around the room. Mira stood up quickly. He noticed her movement and raised a hand in a calm gesture. "Do not be afraid," he said. "I wish to speak without the noise of the court." Mira nodded and waited. He looked around the room as if studying the space itself. "Your kind is smaller than I expected," he said thoughtfully. "But your eyes carry a strong light." "Where I come from," Mira replied, "we survive by learning and by helping one another. That may be what you see." He smiled faintly, though the expression was strange on his face. The traders spoke of humans as soft creatures that live only to serve. Yet I do not see that in you. Mira's voice grew firmer. They are wrong. We have flaws, but we also dream. We build homes from empty worlds and share warmth where there is none. Tavrin listened in silence, then nodded slowly. I believe you, he paused. This practice of gifting living beings, it is an old custom. It began long before I was born. Many believe it is a sign of friendship. But I do not see friendship in the taking of life from its own path. Mira looked at him carefully. Then why accept me? I could not refuse in front of the court, he said. Refusal would have been taken as insult. But now that you are here, I will find a way to return you to your kind. For the first time since her capture, Mira felt a wave of hope. She wanted to thank him, but words seemed too small. You would do that for me? She asked softly. Yes, Tavrin said. No mind that can think and feel should be kept as a prize. They stood in quiet for a while. Outside, the two suns sank below the horizon, and a pale blue moon rose above the sea. Tavrin placed the small light on the table and turned to leave. Before stepping out, he said, Rest well, Mira. You are safe here. When the door closed, Mira sat down again, her heart steady for the first time in days. She did not know if she truly was safe, but she sensed honesty in his words. She looked out the window at the moon and whispered to herself, Maybe there is more kindness in this world than I thought. In the following days, Mira began to see more of the palace. She met the attendants who served Tavrin's household. They spoke politely but seemed uncertain around her. Some avoided her gaze, unsure how to treat a being who looked so different. Others asked careful questions about her world. Mira answered when she could, explaining simple things like rain, trees, and oceans. Her stories filled them with quiet wonder. One attendant, a young one named Kel, brought her flowers from the garden and asked if Earth had colors like these. She smiled and said yes, though in her mind she wondered if she would ever see those colors again. Tavrin did not visit often, but whenever he did, he asked her about human life. He wanted to know how humans shared food, how they built homes, how they treated one another. Mira told him about families, friends, and how people could be both strong and gentle. Tavrin listened with care. Sometimes he asked if humans fought, and Mira answered truthfully but without anger. She told him that humans learned from mistakes and tried to do better. He seemed to admire that. Each evening, Mira would sit by the window and watch the stars. She thought about her station, her friends, and the long silence between worlds. She felt both lonely and curious. This alien world was beautiful, yet it carried a sadness she could not explain. The people moved with grace, but few smiled. Even Tavrin, for all his wisdom, seemed to carry a quiet weight in his eyes. One night, as she looked out at the sea, she thought about the word gift. To her, a gift was something given with care, something that brought joy without taking freedom. But here it meant ownership. She wondered if they would ever understand the difference. Yet she also thought of Tavrin, the noble who chose not to claim her, who spoke with respect instead of command. Perhaps he already understood more than his people believed. Mira wrapped herself in a soft blanket and lay down, staring at the stars through the high window. The light of the twin moons filled the room with silver glow. Her heart felt lighter, though she knew her journey was far from over. Somewhere deep inside, she began to sense that her arrival here was not only a mistake of fate, but the beginning of something greater, something that might change both humans and this alien world forever. Days passed in the palace of Tavrin, and Mira slowly became a quiet part of its rhythm. The halls no longer frightened her as much as before. She learned where the gardens were, where the soft music came from in the evenings, and where the windows opened to the sea below. The air always smelled faintly of salt and flowers that glowed in the dark. Each morning, a young attendant named Kel would bring food for her. The meals looked unusual, with round fruits that floated a little above the plate until she touched them, but they tasted sweet and gentle. Mira smiled more often now. The first few days had been filled with fear, but the calm of this place softened her heart. Still, she did not forget what had happened. She had been taken from her people, and no matter how kind Tavrin seemed, she was still far from home. Sometimes she would wake in the middle of the night and think she could hear the hum of her ship's engines again. Then she would remember the two suns, the blue sea, and the alien palace, and her heart would ache quietly. Tavrin did not visit her every day, But when he did, his presence always brought a strange stillness to the air. He spoke in a voice that carried patience and thought. He asked her many questions about her world, about the sound of rain, the taste of fruit from earth, and the color of skies after a storm. Mira always tried to answer in simple words. Sometimes he would close his eyes as she spoke, as if trying to imagine everything. Once, when she told him about the sound of children laughing, he smiled faintly and said, "Your world sounds full of music." She smiled too. It is when we are not too busy. Over time, Mira began to notice something. No one in the palace ever came close to her. They always kept a short distance, as if there was an invisible circle around her that no one could cross. Even when Kel served her food, he placed the tray carefully and stepped back. Mira thought at first that maybe humans carried something harmful to them, but when she asked, Kel only looked confused. "It is not that," he said softly. "It is respect." "Respect?" she asked, tilting her head. "For what?" "For you. Lord Tavern told us not to touch you unless you allow it." "It is his command," Mira blinked. She was not sure whether to feel comforted or uneasy. No one on earth had ever treated her with that kind of careful distance. It was strange and lonely at the same time. One afternoon she sat by the window watching the two suns fade into the horizon. The sea below shimmered like glass. Tavern entered quietly as he often did. He carried no guards or servants. He stopped near the doorway and said, "You like to watch the sunsets?" "Yes," Mira said with a small smile. "They remind me of home. We only have one sun, but the colors are almost the same." He stepped closer but did not come near the window. "Your world must be a place of great beauty." "It is," she said softly, "though not as calm as this." For a long moment they both stood in silence looking out at the sea. The soft sound of distant waves filled the air. Mira turned her gaze toward him and said, "You never come too close." "Why?" Tavern looked surprised. "Do I make you uncomfortable?" "No," she said quickly. "That is not what I mean. It is just, everyone here stays far away from me. You too. You gave me a room, food, and safety. You ask about my world, but you never come near me. Why haven't you touched me yet?" Her words came out softly, not as a complaint but as a question from a heart that longed to understand. In her culture, touch was a way of kindness. A hand on the shoulder, a greeting, a shared warmth. Here the silence felt colder because no one dared cross that space. Tavern's golden eyes seemed to grow deeper with thought. He looked away toward the horizon. "Where I come from," he said slowly, "touch carries meaning. To reach out to another without asking is to claim them. It is not something we do without reason." Mira frowned slightly, thinking. "Claim them?" "Yes," Tavern said. "It is an old rule among my kind. To touch another being is to say that they belong in your circle of life. It is not a simple gesture. It carries bond, promise, or control. When I was told you were a gift, the expectation was that I would claim you. But I will not." She stared at him, unsure if she understood. "So, that is why you keep distance. Because to touch means to own." He nodded. "I will not take what is not mine to take." Mira's heart softened. "Then I thank you," she said gently. "In my world, touch can mean comfort. A friend might hold your hand not to claim you, but to say you are not alone." Tavern's eyes lifted toward her again. There was warmth in them now, a small light that had not been there before. "Your people have a kind way of seeing the world," he said. "Perhaps that is why they dream beyond the stars." They talked for a long while that evening. Tavern asked about the first human to walk on the moon, and Mira told him about courage and hope. He listened as if every word was a treasure. When night came, he stood to leave, but before he did, he said quietly, "One day when the time is right, you may teach us your kind of touch, the one that brings comfort, not claim." Mira smiled softly. "I will if you wish to learn." When he was gone, she sat again by the window, her thoughts spinning. She realized that the alien noble was not cold or distant out of pride, but out of respect. He lived by rules that were older than his own life, yet he also questioned those rules slowly, carefully. In the days that followed, small changes began to appear. Some attendants began speaking more freely with her. Kel even dared to sit near her once while they shared a meal. He still did not touch her, but the air between them no longer felt like a wall. One evening, Mira found a small gift left outside her door, a smooth stone that glowed faintly when held. A note written in simple words rested beside it. It read, "A light from the garden for the guest who teaches us to see." She smiled. knowing the handwriting belonged to Tavrin. Her room started to feel less like a prison and more like a home. She began walking in the gardens during daylight. The plants shimmered with colors that changed as she moved, and the air hummed softly. Sometimes she would see Tavrin walking along the distant path, talking with his counselors. He always nodded politely when he noticed her, and she would bow in return. Despite the calm, whispers filled the palace halls. Some nobles and servants wondered why Tavrin treated the human with such care. They were used to seeing other creatures brought as gifts, rare animals, servants, or singers, but never given freedom. Mira noticed their glances but stayed quiet. One afternoon, 2 nobles came to visit her chamber. They brought a basket of glowing fruit and smiled politely. Their eyes, however, held curiosity that felt heavy. One of them asked, "Does our lord treat you kindly, little human?" Mira nodded. "He is generous." The noble tilted his head. "And yet he has not marked you. Strange. A gift unclaimed, yet living in comfort." Mira frowned slightly but said nothing. They left soon after, whispering to each other. She could not understand all their customs, but she knew enough to sense that Tavrin's kindness was seen as strange among them. That night, when Tavrin came to visit again, she told him about the noble's visit. His expression stayed calm, but she saw a faint shadow cross his face. "They do not understand," he said. "They have forgotten what it means to honor life. To them, power is shown through possession. I am trying to show them there is another way. Maybe they will listen," Mira said softly. "Maybe," he replied. "But change is slow." He turned to leave, but Mira spoke again. "Tavrin, when I first came here, I was afraid. I thought you might treat me like an object. But now I see that you care about more than your customs. You see me as a person." Tavrin paused at the doorway. "I do," he said. "And one day others will too." When he was gone, Mira sat in silence. The moonlight poured through the window, painting silver across the floor. She held the glowing stone in her hands and felt its faint warmth. In that moment, she realized something deep within her heart. She had arrived in this palace as a stolen gift, meant to be displayed and forgotten. But now she was becoming something more, a voice that spoke gently in a world that had forgotten how to listen. The question she had asked, simple as it was, had begun to change everything. The days in Tavrin's palace grew longer with the slow passing of the twin suns. Mira had begun to feel less like a guest and more like a presence that mattered in the halls. She walked freely through the gardens, her bare feet brushing against soft glowing grass that hummed faintly under her steps. Birds-like creatures with wings of translucent color hovered near the fountains and chirped in notes she had never heard on earth. Mira often paused to watch them, their songs weaving a calm through her thoughts. Tavrin observed her in silence during these hours from a distance. He would stroll through the palace corridors, speaking with his attendants or reviewing messages, yet his golden eyes often lingered on Mira. There was something in the way he watched that felt patient, curious, and thoughtful. Mira had realized that he wanted to understand her, not just her words, but her spirit. One morning, Mira awoke to find Kel waiting outside her chamber with a small notebook. The pages glowed faintly in blue light. "For you," he said. "From Lord Tavrin. He wishes you to write down your stories, about your world, your people, and your ways." Mira blinked in surprise but accepted it. "Stories?" she asked. Kel nodded. "Yes, he says the court wishes to learn from you, but only if you are willing." For the first time, Mira understood the weight of her presence here. She had been brought as a gift, but Tavrin had turned that expectation into something else. He did not want her as a possession. He wanted her as a teacher. Mira sat by her window and began to write. She wrote about oceans, about mountains that reached the clouds, about cities full of light and life. She wrote about humans sharing, building, and dreaming. She wrote about hope. Days turned into a week, and Tavrin would often visit to read what she had written. He asked questions not to test her, but to understand. "How do humans make choices?" he asked one day, his voice gentle. "How do you decide what is right?" Mira thought for a moment. "We learn from each other," she said. "From our mistakes and from our successes. We try to understand the world and the people around us, and even when it is hard, we try to care." Tavrin's eyes shone faintly as he nodded. "Caring is rare in my world." "Many think it is weakness," Mira smiled softly. "It is not weakness. It is strength. Strength that can hold even when everything is heavy. The golden light of the setting suns filled the room as Tavern continued to read. Mira realized that the court's customs, the strange rituals, and even the whispers of nobles could not reach her here. She and Tavern had begun to create a space where ideas mattered more than titles. One afternoon, Mira was sitting in the garden when Tavern appeared quietly. She noticed how he walked differently in the open air, less formal than in the throne room. He stopped near a fountain, its waters glowing silver. "Your stories are remarkable," he said quietly. "You speak not only of the world but of the hearts of your people." Mira looked at him. "I speak what I know. You asked me to teach, and you have," he said. "More than you realize. The court listens when you speak. They whisper of humans with admiration, not just curiosity." Mira's heart lifted. She had not expected to affect the palace so quickly. "Really?" she asked. Tavern nodded. "Even small minds begin to open when they hear of hope. You have planted seeds they cannot yet see, but they will grow." The two stood quietly, listening to the soft hum of the garden. Mira looked at the birds and the glowing plants and realized how much she had begun to belong, in a way she had never expected. Later that evening, Tavern invited her to the library, a vast room that stretched as far as Mira could see. Rows of glowing books hovered in the air, moving slowly as if alive. He gestured to a floating desk. "Tell me more," he said. "Tell me of how humans solve problems together, how you create without destroying, how you care for one another when the world is cruel." Mira nodded and began speaking. She told him of building homes after storms, of people teaching each other to read, of acts of kindness between strangers. Tavern listened closely, his expression thoughtful. He asked questions not to interrupt but to imagine more deeply. "Your people are different from any I have known," he said finally. "They carry both weakness and strength, sorrow and joy, fear and hope. Yet they try." "Yes," Mira said softly. "That is what makes us human. We try, even when the world does not make it easy." For the first time, Tavern smiled fully, not just faintly. "Then perhaps your kind is not meant to be a gift," he said. "Perhaps your kind is meant to teach us." The words warmed Mira's heart in a way she could not describe. She had come as a captive, as a token, yet she was becoming something more, something alive, respected, and heard. Over the next days, she began to notice other changes in the palace. Attendants would linger near her when she spoke, listening quietly. They asked about the food she remembered, about games humans played, about songs and stories. Even Kel began to copy her notes, translating small tales for other servants. Whispered words of admiration for the human spread quietly, changing the mood of the palace little by little. One morning, Tavern asked her to sit with him in the Hall of Mirrors. The walls reflected endless images, but Mira found the reflections oddly comforting. Tavern brought her a small device that showed images of Earth. Cities glimmered in light. Forests stretched to the horizon. Oceans reflected skies. Mira's eyes widened as she saw her home from above. "This is incredible," she said, her voice soft. "You show me the world I left behind." Tavern studied the images with quiet interest. "It is more than beauty. It is a reflection of your people's mind. The care you take, the structures you build, the way you live, it tells a story. Your story." Mira looked at him, realizing he truly tried to understand humans, not as objects or curiosities, but as beings with depth and meaning. "I never thought anyone outside my world could see it that way," she said softly. "Many cannot," he replied. "But I can, and I will." That evening, Mira returned to her room and wrote in her notebook about her hopes, her fears, and the strange kindness of the alien noble who kept distance, yet gave freedom. As she wrote, she understood something new. Her presence here was not about ownership or power. It was about bridging worlds, about showing that one life could inspire understanding and change. The next morning, Mira walked through the palace garden and found Tavern waiting near a pond. The water shimmered, reflecting the colors of the rising suns. Birds hovered above, and soft music from hidden instruments filled the air. Tavern gestured for her to sit on a stone bench. "I have been thinking," he said, "about what you told me yesterday, about caring and trying, about hope." Mira looked at him curiously. "Yes? I realize that my people have lost sight of such things," he continued. "We measure worth by possession, by strength, by display. But your kind, your people, measure worth by the heart." Mira smiled faintly. Sometimes we forget too, but we try. That is all we can do, Tavern nodded. You have shown me something important. That strength and gentleness can exist together. That caring is not weakness. That even a small being can change a great court if the words are true and the heart is open. Mira felt warmth spread through her chest. She had never expected to feel pride in such a strange world, yet here it was. She realized that she had already begun to teach, not by force, but simply by being herself. Do you truly believe that? She asked softly. I do, Tavern said, and one day I will show others the truth of your people. They will learn as I have learned. They will see that life is not a prize to claim, but a gift to understand. Mira's eyes filled with a quiet hope. She knew her journey was far from over. Yet the palace no longer felt like a cage. She had begun to change this world, and it was changing her. As the suns rose higher in the sky, Mira watched the light spill across the garden. She thought of home, of her people, of all the struggles and small victories that made humans who they were, and she understood that even here in a world so different she had a purpose. Tavern stood quietly beside her, not touching, not commanding, but simply present. Mira realized that perhaps this was the kind of understanding humans shared with one another. Not possession, not demand, but respect, care, and shared hope. For the first time since she had arrived, Mira felt truly seen, and in that moment the palace did not feel alien. It felt like a place where two worlds could begin to understand each other. The palace of Tavern had always been orderly. Every day followed a rhythm of quiet steps, soft voices, and careful gestures. But in the weeks since Mira had arrived, the rhythm had begun to shift. Her presence, her stories, and the gentle respect Tavern showed her were changing the air itself. Some nobles whispered when they thought no one could hear. They spoke of a human who had come as a gift yet lived in freedom, and of Tavern, who treated her not as property, but as a teacher and a guest. Some of the attendants, inspired by Mira's words, began to ask questions about humans and their ways. Even the youngest guards paused in their routines to watch her, curious and thoughtful. One afternoon, Tavern held a council in the central hall. The room was vast, with light falling in shifting patterns across polished floors. Nobles sat in raised seats while attendants moved silently among them. Tavern stood at the center, calm and poised, with Mira nearby. The human did not sit. She remained standing, her eyes following the movements around her. One of the oldest nobles spoke first. His voice carried the weight of tradition. My Lord Tavern, he said, this human lives freely among us, unclaimed, unbound. She is not a servant, not a gift in the sense of our law. How can this be acceptable? Mira felt her heart beat faster. The noble's tone was not cruel but firm. She understood now that not everyone saw freedom as a kindness. Some measured power by control. Tavern looked at the speaker without anger. Control is not the measure of strength, he said softly. Wisdom is, the room murmured. Another noble stood. You allow her to speak freely, to wander, to influence the attendants and the guards. This is not custom. You risk dishonor to your house. Tavern's golden eyes held steady. Perhaps it is time that custom changes. The hall grew quiet. Mira looked at Tavern, wondering if he realized the weight of his words. She felt a mix of fear and hope. Fear for herself and the palace. Hope that this moment might mark a change. Then Tavern stepped forward, speaking directly to the gathered nobles. This human came to me not by her own will. She was meant to be displayed like an object, a symbol of wealth and power. But she is no object. She is alive, aware, and capable of teaching us what we have forgotten. A murmur ran through the hall. Some attendants whispered to one another, while a few nobles exchanged glances that were sharp and skeptical. She speaks of courage, kindness, and hope. Tavern continued. She tells stories of a world where people care for one another, even when the odds are against them. I have listened and I have learned. You should too. Mira felt her cheeks warm. She had never imagined that her simple stories could reach the hearts of those who had grown used to power and rule. She realized that Tavern's choice to listen and to value her voice was making a difference. One of the younger nobles spoke, his voice edged with doubt. But my lord, she is foreign. How can we trust her judgment? How can a human teach us values that our kind has followed for centuries? Tavern met his gaze without hesitation. Values are not measured by age or tradition. They are measured by understanding and by action. You speak of loyalty and strength. Yet true strength is shown by how we treat others. The council fell silent. No one spoke for several long minutes. Mira noticed that some attendants were nodding slightly, their eyes softening. Others still looked uneasy. Tavern's words were a challenge to everything they had known, and change was never easy. After a pause, Mira spoke. Her voice was calm, yet it carried the weight of her presence. I did not come here to command. I came to show what is possible. On my world, people care for one another, not because they are told to, but because they choose to. We are not perfect, but we try. That choice, that effort can change everything. The hall quieted further. Mira's words were simple, but they carried honesty. The nobles could feel the sincerity in her voice. Tavern stood beside her, silent but supportive. A murmur ran through the room as some attendants began to speak softly among themselves. They discussed what Mira had said, repeating her stories and wondering if there was truth in them. A few young nobles leaned forward, curiosity replacing doubt. Finally, Tavern spoke again. I will not force anyone to accept this human or her teachings. I will not demand that they change. But I will protect her right to speak and to live freely, and I will ask that you listen. One of the older nobles, whose face had been stern throughout the council, rose slowly. His voice was quieter now. And if we do not, then you will watch as the world changes around you, Tavern said. Change comes not from force, but from understanding. And understanding begins with listening. The council ended shortly after. Some nobles left in silence. Others spoke quietly among themselves. Mira remained with Tavern in the hall for a while, watching the patterns of light from the setting suns reflect on the floor. You were brave, Tavern said softly. I know it is not easy to speak in a place where the rules are so different. Mira shook her head. I was not brave. I just spoke what I knew. The truth is always easier than pretending. He looked at her with those golden eyes that seemed to see everything. And your truth has begun to plant seeds. Others will remember it even if they do not say so now. The next days brought subtle changes. Attendants who had once hesitated now walked closer when speaking to her. Some whispered stories they had heard of humans who helped strangers, who healed the wounded, who shared warmth in cold nights. Mira listened, correcting their details, teaching them about compassion and courage. Kel was the most eager. He carried her notebook everywhere, asking questions and sharing her words with others. The palace was no longer as silent as before. Slowly, curiosity replaced fear, and understanding began to grow. One evening, Tavern brought Mira to the balcony overlooking the palace courtyard. The twin suns had just set, and the first stars of the evening shone faintly. He gestured for her to sit on the ledge beside him. Do you think the nobles will accept this change? Mira asked softly. Tavern shook his head slightly. Some will resist. Change is never easy, but the mind that listens is stronger than the one that rules by fear. Your presence here has shown that even a single voice can inspire reflection. Mira looked down at the glowing gardens below. I only spoke about my world, about the people I know. I did not think it could matter here. It does, Tavern said, because your words carry honesty. They are not commands or demands. They are glimpses of possibility. That is far more powerful than any law or custom. As they watched the stars emerge, Mira realized that the palace felt different. Not all hearts were changed, but some were. Some eyes now saw humans not as curiosities or objects, but as beings capable of teaching and inspiring. The following morning, Mira was walking through the halls when she noticed a small group of attendants speaking quietly. They looked at her with curiosity, their voices gentle. One asked, Human Mira, can you tell us about the way your people care for one another? Mira smiled. Of course, and she said, we share, we listen, we help. Even small actions can bring hope. Even when the world is difficult, we choose kindness. They listened closely, hanging on every word. Mira realized that this was the beginning of a shift. Not all would understand immediately, but some hearts were opening. Tavern appeared behind her, silent. He placed his hand on the railing and looked at the attendants, listening. What you hear is not just about humans, he said softly. It is about life itself. Every being has value. Every choice has weight. Remember this. Mira's heart swelled. She had come to this place as a stolen gift, but she was becoming a teacher, not through command, but through stories, through truth, through courage. And Tavern, with his patience and wisdom, was helping her make a difference. Later that day, Mira returned to her room and wrote once more in her notebook. She wrote about hope, about courage, and about the importance of choosing kindness. She wrote about the palace and its people, and the way a single human could inspire reflection. For the first time, she felt that her presence mattered not only for herself, but for others, and she understood that change, even in a world so different from her own, was possible. As the twin moons rose, casting a gentle glow over the palace, Mira looked out at the gardens below. The soft music, the glowing plants, the gentle movement of attendants all seemed quieter, calmer, but also full of possibility. She realized that her journey was far from over, but for the first time she felt the power of her voice, and the hope that even one being could inspire a world. And Tavrin, standing silently beside her, did not reach out, did not command, but simply observed, a silent partner in the quiet revolution of hearts and minds. The days passed in Tavrin's palace with a quiet yet growing energy. The hallways no longer felt heavy or silent. Attendants spoke softly with one another, sharing ideas, repeating the stories Mira had told, and teaching them to others. The nobles were no longer sure how to react to the changes, yet some could not help but watch with curiosity, and even admiration. The influence of one human who had arrived as a gift was beginning to ripple through the palace. Mira walked through the gardens, her bare feet brushing the glowing grass as birds-like creatures circled above. She had learned the names of many of the plants, their soft hums, and the way their colors shifted with the suns. Kel walked beside her, carrying her notebook and listening intently as she explained how humans found joy in small things, in shared meals, in acts of kindness, and in the comfort of each other's presence. "You have changed this palace," Kel said quietly. "Even the nobles who doubted are talking about your words." Mira smiled gently. "I only shared what I know. The change is not mine alone. Lord Tavrin listens and teaches alongside me. That makes all the difference." Tavrin appeared at that moment, walking silently toward them. His golden eyes met Mira's, and she felt warmth in the quiet understanding they shared. He did not need to speak to communicate support. It was in the look he gave her, the calm he carried with each step. "Tomorrow the council meets again," Tavrin said. "This time I will allow you to speak. The court will hear your voice, not only mine." Mira's heart fluttered. Speaking to the council was daunting, but she knew this was the moment her words could reach farther than ever before. The following day, the council chamber was filled with nobles, attendants, and a few guards who had grown curious of the human presence. Tavrin stood at the center as always, but this time he gestured for Mira to join him. "You may speak," he said simply. Mira stepped forward, holding her notebook tightly. She looked at the gathered faces. Some watched with expectation, others with doubt. She took a deep breath and began. "I did not come here to command," she said. "I came because I was taken as a gift. But I have learned that life is not something to claim or to display. Life is something to understand and to respect. My people live by choice, not by power. We care for one another, even when the world is difficult. We teach, we share, and we listen. And through these small acts, we grow stronger together." The chamber was silent. The words were simple, but their meaning was profound. Even the most skeptical nobles could not deny the truth in her voice. She continued, "You measure worth by possession, by control, by tradition. But what is worth more than life itself? Respect, understanding, compassion, these are the true measures of strength. Even a small being, even one who comes as a gift, can show this. And when we do, it changes everything." Tavrin stepped beside her, his presence steady. He did not speak, but his eyes conveyed approval, support, and trust. Mira felt courage flow through her, knowing she was not alone. When she finished, a long silence filled the room. Then a young noble spoke, his voice careful. I had never considered this. That life could be valued for its courage, not its display. That respect can be stronger than command." Another noble nodded slowly. "Perhaps the human is right. Perhaps we have measured the wrong things for too long." Whispers spread through the chamber. The council was shifting quietly as Mira had hoped. Her words had planted seeds, and Tavrin's wisdom nourished them. After the council ended, Tavrin walked with Mira through the palace gardens. "You spoke well," he said. "Not everyone understands yet, but the change has begun. Some will resist, but others will carry your words forward." Mira looked at the glowing plants, the soft music from hidden instruments, and the attendants walking quietly, talking among themselves. "It is strange," she said softly. "I came as a gift, and now it feels like I belong." "You belong," Tavrin said simply. and so does your voice. Your presence reminds us that life is not to be owned, but to be valued. The days turned into weeks. Attendants taught each other Mira's stories. Young nobles began to ask questions about humans, their choices, and their ways. Even older members of the court, though slower to change, began to listen more carefully. Mira realized that her presence had sparked something deeper than curiosity. It was the beginning of a transformation in how life was seen, measured, and respected. One morning, Tavrin invited Mira to the central hall. The sun had just risen, casting a warm glow across the marble floors. "We are ready," he said. "Today we will begin a new practice. Your lessons will reach beyond this palace to other worlds, other houses. The human's way of seeing life must be shared." Mira felt a quiet joy. She had never imagined that her simple stories, her quiet voice, could make such an impact. "I am honored," she said softly. "Not honored," Tavrin said. "Needed. The worlds need this perspective, and you are the one to show it." Over the following months, a new tradition formed. Every week, Mira would speak to groups of attendants, nobles, and visiting dignitaries. She told stories of courage, of cooperation, of hope and kindness. She spoke of humans building, sharing, and dreaming. Tavrin always listened, silent but supportive, allowing her words to resonate without interruption. Slowly, the palace grew brighter, not in light alone, but in spirit. Word of the human who taught kindness spread beyond the palace. Other houses began to invite attendants to learn from Mira's stories. Nobles who had once dismissed humans now asked questions about their ways. The palace, once a place of strict tradition and fear, became a center of learning and reflection. One evening, Mira sat by the high window in her room, looking out at the twin moons rising above the sea. Kell approached, holding a new notebook. "Lord Tavrin asked me to bring this," he said. "It is for your new stories." Mira smiled and took the notebook. "Thank you, Kell. I will write about what I see, what I learn, and what we can teach together." Kell nodded, eyes shining. "You have changed everything. I hope you know that." "I know," Mira said softly. "And I hope it continues even after I'm gone." The next day, Tavrin asked her to accompany him to the palace courtyard. The twin suns had just risen, their light spilling across the fountains and gardens. A small group of attendants, young and old, waited to hear her speak. Tavrin stepped aside, giving Mira the center. She began to tell stories again, her voice clear and calm. She spoke of humans facing challenges, of people helping one another, of courage and hope. The attendants listened quietly, some nodding, some taking notes, some smiling for the first time in weeks. When she finished, Tavrin stepped forward. "You have done more than I could imagine," he said. "You have reminded us that life is precious, that respect and understanding are stronger than possession, that kindness is a measure of strength. Your presence has changed this palace, and your lessons will reach beyond it." Mira felt a warmth in her chest. She had come as a gift meant to be displayed. Yet she had become a teacher, a voice, a spark that could ignite change. Over the years, the palace became known as a place where humans and aliens shared knowledge and understanding. Attendants carried Mira's stories to other houses. Nobles visited to learn about compassion, hope, and courage. The courts of other worlds began to adopt similar practices. Mira's voice had become a legacy, not just in Tavrin's palace, but across many lands and stars. Long after she had left the palace, statues of a human and an alien standing side by side were placed in gardens and halls throughout the empire. Beneath them, the words she had spoken and lived by were inscribed. "We were gifts once. Now we are the givers of light. Respect life. Teach hope. Choose kindness. Change the world." Mira herself returned to Earth eventually, carrying with her the knowledge that even a single voice, when honest and brave, could make a difference in a world far from home. Tavrin continued to lead with wisdom, always remembering the human who had arrived as a gift, yet became a teacher, a friend, and a symbol of hope. And somewhere among the stars, in palaces and gardens, across oceans of light and worlds of strange beauty, humans and aliens alike remembered that kindness was stronger than command, understanding stronger than tradition, and a single act of courage could ripple across galaxies, changing hearts forever. Mira looked at the twin moons from her ship as she left the alien world, her heart calm. She knew that the legacy she had begun would continue, growing quietly, spreading hope. and showing that even one human could make the universe a better place. And as she smiled, the stars seemed to shine brighter, carrying the message she had taught and lived. Life is not to be claimed, but to be respected, understood, and cherished.